topic I'm excited to talk about, and also I don't think we've actually ever done before. This was submitted by you, so thank you participants for asking for this, um, because this is the other part of what I do in my everyday life. So as we've talked about, besides my name is Jay Rosen with Cafe Oleh, my background is in cross-cultural communication. I'm not your usual Hebrew teacher in that my background is in Israel diaspora relations, and everything that goes with that, and cultural diplomacy and so forth, and having a love for languages and a love for Israel all conspires to create Cafe Oleh. So today we're going to be doing a lot of what I do in my other hat when it comes to cross-cultural communication, which has to do with self-marketing and networking and interviewing. I often teach this a lot in English to people because, like a lot of things in life, we're just presupposed to know some things like how to interview, how to present yourself, how to dress oneself for business occasions. Um, but often we don't know it until it's too late. Same thing is true in Hebrew. And that's also, by the way, for native Israelis who don't grow up necessarily in a business culture, how to dress, how to act, how to shake someone's hand, how to give an introduction, and so forth. So we're going to go over some of that today. And I want to preface it by saying I'm going to try to be as age inclusive as possible, in that I know we have a variety of ages who both join us live and recorded on YouTube. So this is going to be as relevant to as many people as possible, number one. Number two, I'm not going to go over things that Nefesh B'Nefesh provides, and they provide a lot when it comes to employment, whether that's helping you review and write your CV and even translate it from English to Hebrew, whether that's looking for jobs. They have one of the biggest job boards in English in the country. They provide a lot of resources in the actual job hunt. I don't want to go over that. What I want to go over are the things that you can't necessarily learn, even with all those great resources, which is how to present yourself in Hebrew. We've done greetings before. We've done small talk before. I'm not going to focus on that. You're going to see the language that I cover here is going to be very fundamental, seeming rudimentary. But when you zoom out, it's something that we all need in terms of life skills. And we talk about life skills a lot in all sorts of ages. And one of those is how to present yourself. So we're going to cover that. A couple key interview questions, whether it's for a job, whether it's for an internship, whether it's for a volunteering position or mentoring. And this is all not just for your benefit, but this is also a strong encouragement for you all to join us on Wednesday for Cafe Olay Conversations, where we're actually going to be able to practice a lot of what we cover here today. At the top of the hour, I'll talk more about that and next week's class. So first, let's get started here. Sorry, just 1 second. I need to pull up some other notes for myself along the side. Where did they go? Sorry, just 1 second. Okay, perfect. So let's get started with today's vocabulary. Okay, so like I said, we're looking at words that have to do with interviewing and networking. Again, if your specific situation is that you're not looking for a job, please don't come at me in the comments and please don't come at each other in the comments. Okay. This is meant to be for a lot of people because we are currently 289 participants. Um, we are one of, if not the biggest Hebrew class in the world. So remember that in terms of the diversity and the types of people who are in the class here. And also, like I said, I'm going to stretch the vocabulary so it also includes people looking for volunteer opportunities, people looking for mentoring opportunities. Not everyone is looking for a job, and that's not about age. That's about where we're at in the world, right? A lot of these are also going to be important things on how you present yourself in general. So let's get into it. First off, we have a whole bunch of verbs when we talk about this field. And a lot of these you're going to use in everyday life. So even again, if the topic isn't relevant, the words are going to be relevant in everyday situation. Lechapes. Lechapes means to search or to look for. I put this at the top, not just because when we're talking about looking for a job, this is the verb we're going to use, but this is one of the verbs that um, people who are learning Hebrew, in particular native English speakers, mess up. Why? Because they think of the English to look for. Look at the verb here in English to look for. Okay? We have a verb to look, right? We add the preposition for. For is a preposition in terms of a part of speech, and that changes the meaning. It's not just to look, right? We can look at something. We can look also for something, which is very close in the meaning of English to search. Lechapes does not take a preposition after it. Lechapes is always followed by a direct or indirect noun. Okay, it is not lechapes le. Le is the prepositional prefix that gets translated as to or for. It is not followed by le. Okay, I'm going to actually write that in here to always, or let's say not followed by a prepositional prefix, unlike in English. I'm just going to make it a preposition. Okay. The meaning of the word lechapes is to look for. The for is included in the word. You do not follow this with the le. That is a common mistake that you can easily suss out who is a non-native Hebrew speaker or a non-fluent Hebrew speaker. More importantly, if they say ani mechapes la'avodah, that is incorrect. The sentence is ani mechapes avodah. I am looking for work, right? We're going to talk about this. We talked about this a few weeks ago, and that's actually going to be a clue for next week's class. Not everything when you translate from one language to another is a one-to-one ratio. That's not how translation ever works. Hebrew, not necessarily part of that equation. It is not always one word gets translated to another word. Sometimes those words are combined. Sometimes you have to stretch them out. We've seen a lot of examples in that in the past. Lechapes is a great example. Let's move on. Lirayen. Lirayen means to interview. Okay. You can think of this as coming from the same root as the verb lirot, to see, right? And lehalot, to show. But lirayen is the modern Hebrew word, because obviously to interview is a modern conception. So lirayen is to interview, and lehitrayen is to get interviewed. We've talked about transitive and intransitive verbs. Lirayen, someone interviews you, versus I get interviewed. Okay, it's not passive, it's what we call transitive versus intransitive, but just know that's the meaning of these two verbs. Okay? Lehagish means to submit. For example, lehagish is to submit. It's also, by the way, to serve. Let me put that here as well. Not serve as in the military, but to serve like a meal, to serve papers, as in lehagish muamadut, right? Lehagish muamadut is how we say in Hebrew to apply. It literally translates to submit or to serve candidacy, or an candidacy. Okay. Um, Again, what I just said about translation is the same here. Lagish muamadut is the same thing as what we say is to apply. So, for example, if you're looking at a Hebrew job listing, right? And at the bottom where it says to actually apply, it's going to say lahagish muamadut, or it's going to use the verbal noun lahagashat muamadut. But either way, that's the same as an English job listing that says to apply, please contact blah, 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 or to apply, please click here. In Hebrew, it's not one verb. It's not one word even. It's lehagish muamadut, literally to submit candidacy. Okay? Lehatzia is to offer, and lihitkabel to get accepted, right? You can think of these verbs as the time, spectrum of what you do from looking for a job to hopefully getting a job, right? Looking for, interviewing, submitting, offering the position to you, and or getting accepted. Lehit kabel, to get accepted. We use this verb to get accepted into academic programs, into a job, into all sorts of different things, right? We don't say, I got the job. Again, no literal translation here from English to Hebrew. We would not say, Ani kibalti et tafkid. You may hear that. It is not proper Hebrew. What you would say is hitkabalti la tafkid. I got accepted to the position or to the job. Okay. And finally, one we've talked about a lot, we're going to use this in a little bit. You're going to see towards the end of today's spreadsheet, is a really important one. We've talked about this word a lot. It's the verb esmach. Esmach is the future tense of the verb lismoach. If that sounds familiar, yes, it does have the same root, same shoresh, the same three letters as sameach. Sameach means happy, right? Lismoach is the verb to become happy. So if I want to say, I'd love for something to happen, ani esmach, or simply esmach. Esmach le or esmach she, I'd love to fill in the blank. You're going to see how we use that in a little bit. Esmach, by the way, on its own is a great reply, as we've talked about before, instead of saying ken. If someone offers you something and you want to apply in the affirmative positively, you can simply say esmach, I'd love it. It's a very nice way to reply to someone. Now let's get into some actual nouns of what we're talking about before we get into some actual conversation here or expressions. First off, chipus avodah. Remember that verb lechapes? Well, lechapes up here is what we call the infinitive, right? To do something. In this case, to search, to look for. Chipus is what we call the verbal noun. It's the act of doing something. In this case, searching. For what? Avodah, work. Chipus avodah is a job search. Literally, the searching for work or searching for work. There's no the in this specific case. Okay, so you'll also see people refer to it as chipus avodah, job search, or more literally translated, looking for a job. I'll actually put that here. Looking for a job. Okay. Now we have a couple other words, right? I've taught you the word avodah, job, work in general. Okay. Then we have two words that are very similar in meaning, but just like in English, they all have different functions and they have actual different words. So we have the word avodah that can be translated as work or a job in certain cases. Then we have the word misra. Misra means a position in the sense of you'll see in job searches in Israel, misra melea or misra chelkit. Misra melea, male means full. So a misra melea is not a full position, it's a full-time position versus a misra chelkit. Chelek is a section, right? So misra chelkit, part-time work. Okay? And finally, tafkid. Tafkid means role. We use this not just in jobs, we use this in, for example, entertainment. Whoever's filling the role of a certain character in a play or a movie, for example, tafkid. Okay. Then we have the word we talked about muammadut before, muammad. A muammad, male, or muammadat, female, is a candidate or an applicant, right? We use this term in politics. Someone who's running for a position is a muammad. But we also use this word, when we talk about applicants to a position, right? Lahagish muammadut, right? Our next word here. Muammadut is candidacy, right? Think of it when you are interviewing for a job or applying for a job, you are a candidate for that position. It's another way to phrase it and that you often hear as well, right? So muammadat is as much a candidate as they are an applicant, and muammadut, candidacy. We use these terms in politics as well as we use them in the job field. Okay. We had lerayen to interview and lehitrayen to get interviewed. Now we have the actual interview, reayon. You're going to see that a lot, by the way, in Hebrew. And we've talked about this many, many times. We'll continue to talk about it, that we often have sentences using the same root in different forms, right? Um, in English, that would be the equivalent of it's raining rain, right? An incorrect sentence in English, but in other languages, Hebrew included, you may have sentences that sound very similar to that. So reayon, the act of interviewing, aka an interview. Maskoret is a salary. Okay. And like a lot of these words, the more contemporary the concept is, the less Hebrew you're going to find. So for example, there is a Hebrew alternative for this word, but we don't use it. It is networking. Okay, networking is how we normally say it, but you can simply say networking. It's all right. In Hebrew, we usually when we're pronouncing words from other languages, we say all the letters. So, for example, the way I speak American English, I would say networking, right? That T gets sort of lost as sort of a, right? But you'll hear Israelis say networking or networking, right? They'll pronounce the T. Usually, and having lived so many years in Israel now, people will say, "Oh, wait a minute, what's your native language?" Because they can't figure it out, but this is one of those clues, right? Where I'll say networking, teaching in this case. I won't necessarily say that in other places. But a classic example, if you live in center of Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, both cities have a street called Rehov, which is a street, Lincoln, right? Lincoln is President Lincoln, right? US President Lincoln. But because in English there's that silent L, in Hebrew, because every letter is pronounced, so too is it there. Lincoln is how you say a president's name in Hebrew in Israel. We had latzia before. Here again, the verbal noun, hatza'a, an offer. We use this for an offer for work. You can use this, for example, in my line of business because I have my own business. Hatza'at mechir. Mechir is a price. So a hatza'at mechir is a price proposal, right? An offer, proposal, and so forth. Okay. And finally, hizdamnut. And this is where, again, not everything when we're talking about these words has to be about a full-time or even a part-time salaried job. Oftentimes, we're simply looking for a hizdamnut. Hizdamnut and hizdamnuyot, the plural, is opportunity. Okay, hizdamnut, opportunity, a great word to know. Okay. And as I was saying before, we've talked about these words before, but I wanted to be sure to include it to make this as inclusive of a class as possible. Mitnadev and mitnadevet. Mitnadev, masculine, mitnadevet, feminine, right? Both of these words mean volunteer. So for some of you, you may be looking to volunteer. Some of you may not necessarily know what you're looking for, but it isn't a full-time or even a salaried position, right? Mitnadev, mitnadevet, volunteer. Hitnadvut is volunteering, right? The act of volunteering. Also, and becoming increasingly popular, especially in the for-profit world, but also in the nonprofit world, by the way, is a mentor or mentoring, right? You can simply say mentor or mentoring. Oftentimes, accelerators, different networking chains, even individual companies are looking for mentors to help them grow and expand, as well as getting advice back, right? So mentoring. I didn't include the transliteration there because just like with networking, just say it in English, you're good to go. I told you that this was going to be a class not just about job searching, but in general, being in touch. And we've talked about being in communication. Here are those words. And these are really important. Again, you don't have to be looking for a job for these words to be super relevant for you because there's always going to be a need to be in touch with someone. That could be about paying bills. I can do my whole spiel at the beginning of class, right? Here are those words. Kesher. Kesher is both a connection and we also use it as contact. Okay. Kesher, by the way, when we say connection, that can be professional, that can be social, that can be romantic. Anything that's a connection is a kesher. It's also used in this context as a contact, and you'll see how in a second. Pratim. Pratim are details. Okay. So if I put these two words together, right? Kesher, contact, and pratim, details, what do you think prate kesher or pirte kesher means? Right? This is the compound noun, right? This is the construct case, the fancy word, but this is a compound noun created with the word pratim that gets turned into prate at the beginning of a compound noun, meaning two or more nouns together. And the word kesher, connection. What do you think prate kesher means? If you said contact details, you'd be correct. So whether this is listed on someone's Kartis Be Cool business card, which is unfortunately out of style now, or on their letterhead or on their website or on their email or on their phone as a QR code, doesn't matter. Pratei kesher, or often said pirtei kesher, as you see in the transliteration, means contact details. This will include all the ways by which someone can get in touch with you. And speaking of that, what do you think an ish or an eshet kesher is? If kesher again is a contact or a connection, ish is a person, a man. Eshet in this case is a woman, right? It's the construct case form because these are two nouns to put together. An ish or an eshet kesher, depending on gender, is contact person, right? We had piltei kesher, contact details, and now we have ish or eshet kesher, contact person, right? If I want to say contact persons, anshe kesher. But for now, a contact person, you really want to have one person to be in touch with usually. Email. We've talked about this word before, always important to go over. In modern Hebrew, we have two ways to say email. You can say doar elektroni. Please don't come at me in the comments and try to say, well, J isn't the word for electricity, chashmal, so shouldn't it be doar chashmali? No one says doar chashmali. Please don't try to be a show off. It's not even being a show off. People will look at you weird. Doar elektroni is how you say it. Doar, mail, like snail mail, like postal mail. Elektroni, electronic. Yes, we use the word chashmali in everyday Hebrew, but when it comes to email, we do not use that word. It is either doar elektroni or simply mail. If someone says to you mail, they're only referring to email. Okay? Mispar telephone. Oftentimes, when you're asking ma mispar shelcha, or someone asks you rather, Ma mispar shelcha, what's your number? They're not asking you for your age. They're not asking you for your zodiac sign or anything or your address, right? They're asking for your mispar telephone. We've talked about this a lot in Hebrew that when you can say the same thing but with fewer words, syllables, and or letters, the better. It's understood when you are sharing Piltei Kesher, contact details, that if you ask for someone's number, you're not asking for anything other than their telephone number. Okay? Mispar telephone is the long way to say it, but you can simply say mispar, which means a number. Okay? Now, we have two verbs that mean to get in touch. Litzor kesher and lihitkasher. Litzor means to create, right? Yotzer is a creator, Yetzirah is a creation, and kesher, we already have that word, connection and contact, right? Lehit kasher means to get in touch, right? To contact one another. But often you'll see litzol kesher. If you go on a Hebrew website, almost any company's website in Israel in Hebrew will say at the bottom where it has the contact details, leyetzirat kesher, right? And that's using the verbal noun of the verb litzol for getting in touch, and then it'll have the phone number and email and maybe social media handles, right? Litzol kesher simply means to create a connection. It literally means that, but we use this in everyday Hebrew to mean to get in touch. Some people find it easier to say. Litzol kesher versus lehit kasher. And oftentimes, and that's why I put the asterisk here, litzol kesher is the one that's going to win. For various reasons I don't want to get into now, litzol kesher is usually the way you say to get in touch. Just like to get in touch, we can also do something similar, but from the other side, to leave one's details, right? Leave me your phone number. Leave me your email address. Leave me your Instagram handle, right? Lahashir pratim. Lahashir means to leave behind, right? Or to cause something to stay. But it really means to leave behind, not in abandoning something. That's a bit different verb. This is simply to leave something, aka behind, or i.e. behind. Lash'ir pratim, to leave one's details. You'll hear this, by the way, if you call automated menus many times and they give you the option of leaving your phone number and they'll get back to you rather than you staying on the elevator music in the background for a couple long minutes. And they'll use this verb, lahashir pratim. Lashir את מספר הטלפון, אנא הקישו כוכבית. We did a whole class on the automated menus. Please don't ask me in the comments. Instead, I'm directing you to our YouTube channel. Find that class. Okay? Lash'ir pratim, to leave one's details. And finally, you'll also, when you talk about getting someone's details, they might ask you to lirshom. Lirshom in this context means to write down. It really does mean to list. You know the word reshima, a list, right? Lirshom, you'll hear people say tilshom or tilshemi, depending on the gender of the person they're speaking to. It means write down this. Literally list the following. But in English, we say to write down. Again, a reminder of what we talked about at the beginning of this class, right? Lirshom. One word is the equivalent to three words in English. To write down is lirshom. Okay? An important understanding when you're learning another language, it's not always a one-to-one ratio when translating. Now, this is something I teach a lot. Obviously not here at Cafe Oleh. This is the first time we're talking about it. I teach this a lot to high schoolers, to young professionals, to older professionals, to um, people who are retired. It doesn't matter whether they're native Hebrew speakers, English speakers, wherever they are in the world, is what we call in Hebrew pitch ma'alit, or in English, same thing, an elevator pitch. If you don't know what an elevator pitch is, let me explain it to you very quickly. We're going to actually practice this in Cafe Oleh Conversations. So this is another shout out to please register and join us for Wednesday's class if you haven't already done so in the past. What is an elevator pitch? It's the same thing in Hebrew or in English. I'm going to describe it in English to make it easier, right? The idea is you have a meeting on the fifth floor of a building. You go into the lobby, you get into the elevator, you press button 5 to get to the fifth floor, and just as the doors are closing, in steps the person you have been dying to meet for years and years, or maybe ever since you're looking for a new opportunity. That could be a job, that could be networking, that could be mentoring, it doesn't matter. The person you have been dying to meet to help you advance yourself gets in the elevator and presses the third floor. You have between when the doors close and when the third floor um, elevator opens and the person gets out to introduce yourself, not only introduce yourself, but to cause that person to want to know more about you and to invite you to an interview. I talk about this a lot when it comes to self-marketing and job searching in general, just as a resume. And I didn't get into a resume here on purpose because Nefesh Benefesh provides great resources on that. And uh, you sending in a resume is not to get a job. You sending in a resume is to get the interview for the job. You having an elevator pitch is not to get you a job. You getting an elevator pitch, having an elevator pitch is to get you the interview or the meeting that you want, right? And it's three parts: introducing yourself, what you currently do, and why you're relevant to the other person you're speaking to, right? That may sound familiar. That's the formula for a cover letter. That's the formula for a lot of things in life. So here's my one of the versions of my elevator pitch. We're going to practice this on Wednesday, but I want to give this to you already so you could see how it looks. This is a little wordy, but I do this a lot. So I'm it always changes. I'm not always fluent in it, but you'll see it's more about the structure and what's included and what's not included here. Yep. So if I were to say mine, here's how it goes. The English is on the left. I didn't put the transliteration. It's quite long. היי, קוראים לי ג'יי רוזן, אני מתעסק בייעוץ והכשרה בתקשורת בין תרבותית, ואני אשמח ליצור קשר כדי לשמוע עוד על הניסיון שלך והזדמנויות לשיתוף פעולה. Okay, just like in English, it's going to be quick, to the point, who you are, what you're currently doing, why it's relevant to the other person, and what you want them to do, right? It's not, I want to talk about getting a job. It's not, I want to anything other than picking their brain or getting their details and scheduling that meeting, right? So you're enticing them to ask more. In that little bit of time, you can maybe hand over a QR code or a business card or something along those lines to generate that meeting. Okay. Wednesday, we're going to practice an elevator pitch, but I want to give you that formula if you've never heard about it before. And in Hebrew, it's called pitch malit. Pitch obviously comes from pitch. You will see some people refer to it as a ne'um ma'alit. I don't like that term because ne'um is much long form. Ne'um usually gets translated as a speech. This is not a speech. By all means, don't think of this as a speech. You have only a few seconds, right? From when the elevator closes on the ground floor to when it opens again on the third floor to present yourself, right? So this is an example of an elevator pitch. We'll focus more on that on Wednesday's class. So in the next part, I want to give some common questions, topics, and things that come up when you're interviewing. And again, interviewing isn't always for a job. Those of you who want to interview, volunteer, for example, in schools, you're going to need to be screened. Or you want to volunteer in other places where there is some level of screening people and interviewing people to make sure that they're relevant for the position, you're going to need to know some of these things. And in general, these are questions that are so open-ended. They're going to be relevant for Shabbat dinner tables, to a happy hour, to meeting a complete stranger. For example, the question, ספר לי עוד על עצמך, or ספרי לי עוד על עצמך. A classic interview question, but again, this totally comes up in a date, in meeting a new person at the dinner table, in a friendly coffee meetup somewhere. Tell me more about yourself, right? The self-marketing hat on me will tell you you never answer this question with anything that's in your resume, right? The point of this is to ask is if someone is interviewing you for a position or a volunteering position or a mentoring position, right? They're trying to find out more about you beyond your resume and your relevancy for the position, but also how you talk and express yourself, right? So this is a great way to talk more about yourself, but again, something that isn't necessarily accessible on your resume. And then finally, after being for a long time in Israel, and doing my own job searches, being interviewed, getting accepted, not getting accepted, starting my own business, I have found one of the magic keys in the job search, not just in Israel, but frankly around the world. And this word in English and in Hebrew is a really important word to get down. This word in English is to invest or investment. In Hebrew, lehashkia or hashka'a. What do I mean by that? Israelis, and specifically the Israeli job market, is very risk averse. Right? And if you are an Oleh or an Olah who's watching, either live or recorded, you will probably attest to the fact that if you looked for a job in Israel, at some point you were probably told directly or indirectly, you are a flight risk. You are either too qualified for this position, you will get bored of this position, or frankly, we think you're a flight risk. After 6 months, you'll probably leave and go back to America or wherever you're from. You've probably heard that before. I've heard that my entire adult life, right? And understanding that and understanding how risk averse Israelis are in general, not just about employing Olim, I figured out the solution, and the solution is using the word lahashkia. Even if you're applying to something that has absolutely nothing to do with finance, nothing to do with economics, this word works. For example, the sentence when you are interviewing for a position, any position again, not just a job, but also volunteering or mentoring, right? אני מחפש מקום להשקיע בכישרונות שלי ובתמורה שישקיע בי. I'm looking for a place to invest my talents, for my talents in, to invest my talents, you can say in English, right? And in turn be invested in. This is a golden word and a great use of the word in a sentence to make it clear that I'm not just looking for a job, I'm looking for an investment. I'm looking for an hizdamnut, an opportunity. Okay? I could swap out the word makom, place, and I could put in hizdamnut. I'm looking for an opportunity to invest my talents and in turn be invested in, right? That when you use the word investment, anyone who's applying, who's interviewing for a position on the job, on the corporate side, will understand that as a long-term relationship, right? An investment is a long-term thing. It's not a quick fix, right? And so if you're looking for a gainful employment or gainful opportunity, volunteering or mentoring, whatever else it may be, using the word lashkia, like in this context, to invest, goes a long way. It says to someone, okay, this person's in it for the long run. It may be hard at first to bring them in, but they're really geared up for being a part of our team. They're worth it, right? They're worth the initial investment, i.e., that first uphill battle of getting them on board and all the details and the paperwork and blah blah blah, because they are in this, right? They use the word investment, long-term relationship. Okay, and then finally, two ways, right? Two ways we can leave our contact. There are lots of other ways to use the words that we had at the top of the screen, and you saw them being used again and again in both my elevator pitch in that word investment. We can say, for example, Esmach liot bekesher. I would love to be in touch. Esmach, I would love, or I would be happy to. Lihiot, to be. Bekesher, in touch, right? In contact. אפשר את הפרטים שלך, or אפשר את הפרטים שלך, depending on the genders who you're speaking to. Can I get your details? Let me make sure that that's in masculine here, right? Can I get your details? A couple things here. First off, אשמח להיות בקשר. I'd love to be in touch. That's a great way to make it clear. Let me get your contact. For example, at the end of your elevator pitch, you can say, אשמח להיות בקשר. אפשר את הפרטים שלך? Right? Efshar is our magic word that's always polite at the beginning of a question, in which you're being extremely polite. It's the equivalent of can I, may I, and so forth. Tapratim. Those of you who are raising your hands and saying, wait a minute, Jay, wait a minute. It shouldn't be et tapratim shilcha. Well, first off, kol hakavod. Well done. You know and have mastered the use of the word et, right? The article et is used before a direct object, and you're absolutely right. I'm teaching you not just Hebrew and not just modern Hebrew, but how we speak in modern Hebrew. In modern Hebrew, you will hear people say Efshar et hapratim shelcha. You're also going to hear increasingly people truncate it, just like we have contractions in English, can't, won't, I'd, and so forth. We have those in Hebrew, where we mush together et hapratim into one word, tapratim. Efshar pratim shecha, especially those of you who are hung up at the speed in which native Hebrew speakers speak. If you want to get to that speed, you have to start truncating your words. It's not considered in this context informal or impolite, but it's the way a lot of Hebrew speakers speak. The more, again, we can condense words, that is as true 5,000 years ago as it is today, the better the Hebrew is. So efshar pratim shelcha is the same thing as efshar et pratim shelcha, but it's less clunky because we've mushed it all together. Okay, so that's why it says efshar pratim shelcha. Okay? You can come after me in the Q&A if you'd like, but I stand by that in terms of getting you to a more native level of confidence in speaking in Hebrew. And then finally, we had that word, that verb lahashir, right? To leave or to leave behind. So if you want to say to someone on the other side who's trying to get in touch with you, right? Tashir or tashiri pratim, niye bekesher. A little bit cold, a little bit of distance, but not always the worst thing. Leave me your contact details. We'll be in touch. A lot of words in English, not so much in Hebrew. Tashir or tashiri, depending if you're speaking to a male or a female, leave for me, or leave, pratim, details. Literally, leave details. We will be in touch. Niye, we will be, bekesher, in touch, in contact. But in English, this is the equivalent of leave me your contact details. We'll be in touch. Okay. It's only 4 words in Hebrew. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 potential words in English. Tashir pratim, niye bekesher. Okay, a little cold because we didn't say tashir pratim shelcha, just as we said in the previous one. Leave your details, but it's implied when I'm looking right at someone and I'm communicating one-on-one, it's your contact details. Okay, this is going to be the basis for what we're going to do on Wednesday. And I really want to frame, whether you've joined us before for Cafe Oleh conversations or not, I really want to frame this as part 1 of this week's Cafe Oleh lesson. I encourage you, strongly encourage you, for those of you who are available, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Israel time, to join us for Cafe Oleh conversation. Why? Because you're going to be doing 4 different things. You're going to be able to craft and recite your own elevator pitch, a very important skill set, by the way, in English. If you haven't done it before, you should definitely be practicing it, but now we're going to practice it in Hebrew. You're going to be answering very similar in answer and content to an elevator pitch. Tell me more about yourself. So you'll be asking and answering this in your breakout rooms. You'll be practicing this golden word and golden use of it, lashkia, right? A very important word to use. And you're going to be practicing getting someone's details. Because remember, getting someone's details is not always about a job. It could be romantic, it could be social, it could be economic, it could be financial, it could be all sorts of things. But to make a connection is rather important to do when you're living in a new country, right? So these are the words you're going to be using and practicing on Wednesday. If you have not signed up yet for Cafe Oleh Conversations, I highly recommend you doing so. The link is both in the chat and in on excuse me and on Nefesh Benefish's website. If you sign up no later than 24 hours in advance, you'll get a prompt with not just this spreadsheet, but with the conversation prompts I want you to practice in advance. And I will want you to practice. Take what we learned today, practice it on your own so that when you come on Wednesday and I separate you into breakout rooms based on your proficiency level, you'll be able to practice. Okay. We're currently up to 305 participants. Toda rabah, thank you all for joining. Before I get to your questions, as I see there are a bunch in the Q&A, first off, as a reminder, if you have questions you'd like me to answer live, please put them in the Q&A about this class. Everything else, please leave to the chat. Before I get to those questions, with the time that we have remaining, I also want to tell you about next week's class. So next week's class is a follow-up to a class we had a couple weeks ago on articles and fillers, because I saw a lot of people coming at me in the comments saying, well, wait a minute, Jay, can you say the same thing without the word eze? And I said, you might be able to, but that's not how native Hebrew speakers speak. And that goes to a lot of what I said in today's class about it's not always a one-to-one ratio of words quantity-wise, but it's also not one-to-one in terms of quality. Eze can mean a whole bunch of different things, not just the word which. We're going to be practicing very common words in everyday Israeli Hebrew that don't necessarily have a straight translation. For example, eze. For example, min kazeh or kazeh, or all sorts of things that you're going to hear Israelis throw out all the time. And you're going to understand the context in which they use them and then practice using them. Because again, eze is one of those words you're going to hear all the time and really distinguishes between someone learning Hebrew and someone using Hebrew on a regular basis. So how to use it is also about how to understand when it's used and then practice it. That's what we're going to be doing next week. Okay. In the meantime, let me answer some questions in the Q&A. When I walk into a clothing shop, how do I say to an assistant, I'm just looking? We've covered that actually multiple times in previous classes, but you can just say, you're not going to say, I'm just looking, because if you say, ani mechapes, that sounds like I'm looking for something. You're not going to use that verb in that context. You are instead going to use the word mistader or mistaderet. Ani mistader means I'm fine. Literally, I'm sorted out or I am organized on my own. From it's the same root as the word seder and beseder, right? We get mistader. Mistader means I'm doing all right. Someone asks you, mechapes mashu, are you looking for something? You can say, lo, ani mistader. No, I'm doing all right. I'm just looking. It's the equivalent of I'm just looking, meaning I don't need any help. Okay. Whole bunch of questions here. Let me an acting agency sent me a Hebrew text that the position was closed to me, which I thought meant that I didn't get it until I got a message from the employer telling me to show up. So how is closed to you used in terms of job offers? If something is sagul, for example, if you are making plans with someone, at the end of sorting out the details, you will see that someone will say sagul, closed, literally, or sagalnu, we closed it. That means that confirmed. Great question, right? Sagul or sagalnu means that done, deal. Same words that we use in English, but we use the verb to close, right? It's not that it's closed to you. It will say very explicitly, if you do not get a job in Hebrew, it will say very explicitly, we decide to pass on your candidacy or reject your candidacy or we decide to pick someone else. It won't be sagal. If anything, lisgor al hamuamadut, literally to close on your candidacy means to be accepted. Great question. Can avodah also be used as an assignment? Dugma, yesh li avodah la'agish machal. Yes, right? Avodah means work. So it could be also work in the sense of I have work to do, not a total summation of my job, but rather a specific piece of work. So yesh li avodah la'agish machal, I have work to submit for tomorrow. Absolutely correct. Great question. What is the feminine version of the word for candidacy? There is no such thing. Muammadut. Let's also do a quick review of grammar here, folks. And I understand that gender is a very hard thing for native English speakers to understand. Candidacy is not a person. Candidacy is an abstract noun or it's a specific position. This word is feminine. Candidate and applicant are a person and thus need to be defined as is it a male candidate or a female candidate? Muhammad is a male candidate, Muhammadet is a female candidate. But candidacy, the act of something being up for candidate, right, is a noun. And it has nothing, this doesn't change gender, right? It is a female, it's a feminine word, Muhammadut. Okay? Is there a difference between maskolet and malviach? Yes. Maskolet is the modern Hebrew word for salary. Malviach, or coming from the verb lehalviach, means to profit. We also have from the same root revacha, which means welfare. None of these have to do with a salary. Maskolet is a salary. Would Israelis pronounce the double vav or as a W sound in the word networking? Listen to how I say it. Networking. There may be someone who says networking. I would imagine that they're of an older generation. Younger generations, being influenced by American English, will be able to say W, but they'll also be prone to saying every letter in that word. So it's networking. Right? What are pratim in terms of a context of a supermarket? You're thinking of the word pritim. Same root. Pratim are details. Pritim, with an extra yud in the middle, means items. We're actually going to talk about the supermarket in a few weeks from now. How do I say paper mail to differentiate from mail? Doal. Remember, I said doal means postal mail. Doal electroni means electronic mail, i.e., email. Doal on its own, or doar, means snail mail. Are there different words for office phone and cell phone? Great question. I didn't put that in there on purpose. The vast majority of Israelis, um, when they say misspell telephone, they're only referring to their cell phone. Fewer and fewer people have a landline. You don't need it as much anymore to get internet, for example. Most people don't have them. Instead, it's almost always referring to a cell phone. And this is something that they will teach you in Nefesh Ben Nefesh and other places when you're building your CV. You can also tell someone's phone number based on the kidomet, the beginning of the number. If it's 05 and then another number, that means it's a cell phone number. So you'll already immediately be able to tell what number someone's giving you. When asked for a number, is it not true they might be asking you for a two-dot-zod? Absolutely not. Folks, absolutely. Let me make that abundantly clear, and thank you for whoever asked that. Never, ever, ever give out your Teudat Zahut, your national ID number, willy-nilly. If someone is asking you for your number, they will say very explicitly it's your Teudat Zahut, and only give that out in very specific circumstances that have to do with your own personal security. You never give out your Teudat Zahut number. For Americans, think of this as your social security number. You do not give this out to just anyone. You give it to verify your identification. But if someone says "Efshar mispar shelcha," they are not, absolutely not asking for your Teudat Zahut. They are only asking for your mispar telephone. Just because they don't say the word telephone, do not read into that any more than your phone number. Really important. Thank you for asking that. Very important to clarify that for everyone. Do not give out your Teudat Zahut number freely. What are the words for here is my business card? I do have a business card. I'm not including that here. As I taught this class recently, and someone looked at me and said, "What's a business card?" Business cards do exist in Hebrew. I will put it in the final version. I'm not going to teach it here, but we say "Kaltis be cool." They just aren't as common anymore, unfortunately. I personally love them a lot, but I will include it before we send out the spreadsheet to everyone. Nisayon means experience. It also means opportunity. I do not use the word nisayon does not really mean trial in that context. It really does mean experience. It's understood in the context. I'm not asking about someone's trials and tribulations in life, nor am I asking them about their challenges, but I appreciate that question. Why do I think business cards are passe? Because as what I just said, I've used the word and they're like, what's a business card? You will also just not see people walk around with the business card in the same way that they used to. Lita'em does not mean to get in touch. Lita'em is used when, for example, you are trying to synchronize or coordinate in different things, but that does not necessarily imply to get in touch and mean to be in contact. Efshal is what we use in modern Hebrew. We do not use the word nitan in everyday Hebrew. That is a word that's reserved for the news and for very formal speech. Do not say the word nitan. You will sound very disconnected from everyday Israelis. Efshal is the magic word. Will I hear back? Is there anything else you need from me? That's a great question. I'm going to add that to our list before sending it out to you. Thank you for asking. Let me put that in here. Let me look at some more questions you have. Sorry, just a second. Here we go. When one says we will be in contact, does it mean either one can initiate the contact? No, it means we, as in the company, will be in touch. That's a great question. Nia bekesher, depending on the context, but if you are interviewing for a job, it does mean that we, the company, will be in touch. I've been told that Israelis don't really use LinkedIn to make business connections. Is there an alternative site used more in Israel? There's no alternative site. There is an alternative. Unfortunately, it's called Potexia. You may have heard that word before. Potexia means it's not what you know, it's who you know. A lot of people get their jobs, even to this day, through networking, through being introduced from one person to another, or as I showed you the elevator pitch, LinkedIn is being used, but Potexia is still a very important tool in Israeli society. Okay? To tell people about my volunteer experience, do I say, or what preposition or other word do I use after the verb before I say I did as a volunteer? So you can either conjugate the verb lehitnadev, I volunteered, ani hitnadavti, or you can say I was a volunteer, right? Just like in English, I was a volunteer or I volunteered. They both mean the same thing. Hayiti mitnadev, I was a volunteer. Okay. What preposition or other word do I use after the verb? Um, what do I, for example, ani hitnadavti bechaklaut. I volunteered in bechaklaut, agriculture. Excuse me. Is there an equivalent to internship? There is a word for internship. I didn't include it here because unlike North America and other Western countries, in Israel, it's not very common outside of two specific fields to have the equivalent of an internship. And even there, it's not an internship because it's either part of your studies and or it's paid, which is either a in the medical field or in the legal field. In Israel, it's against the law to hire someone without being paid. Um, Not to mention the culture of internships that we know in other countries doesn't exist the same way. Lehamlitz means to recommend. Lehatzia is to suggest or to offer as well. Yes. Um, do Israelis job hop a lot? Not certainly older generations, just like older generations around the world typically don't. If you're in the startup world, you are usually job hopping a lot because that's the nature of the business. meaning that companies fold or positions change and you're looking for a better one. So people often do in that specific sector move around a lot. I notice Bivakasha is not here. Absolutely right. We've gone over this many times before. We have many lessons about this. If you're already saying efshal, you do not need to use bivakasha. Efshal is already a very polite word. Again, about literal and cultural translations from one language to another. You don't need to literally say everything you would in English. Same here. It doesn't mean that Israelis are any more or less polite or impolite. Efshal tapatim is enough. But you could say efshal tapatim vaksha, but it's understood in that context. I'm already saying it nicely, and could I please have them? Is rak mistakel acceptable instead of ani mistader? Um, Usually you'll get some smart aleck comment to rak mistakel, because you're translating just looking, like you would say in English, versus ani mistadel, which means I don't have any questions right now, or I'm good, I'm sorted out. Rak mistakel is also not a great thing to say to a shop owner, right? Because what if you actually do need help? And they'll say, Rega, חשבתי שאתה רק מסתכל. Wait, I thought you were just looking, right? Think of it. You come into a store and they say, I'm just looking. In English, it's actually not so polite either, by the way, because it means I have no interest in buying anything. I'm just looking. I'm browsing maybe a little bit nicer, but people often say, I'm just looking, right? It means like, why are you even here? You're wasting my time. You're wasting space that a potential person who is coming to buy should have. Ani mistadel means that at the moment I'm sorted. I'm good to go. It's a better term to use. Okay. Do you have to clarify? Do I have to register for Cafe Oleh conversations each week? Absolutely not, folks. If you see your original confirmation for both Monday and Wednesday's class, by the way, you'll see a list of all the lessons. So if you've already registered, great. I hope you'll actually join us on Wednesday. Is stage still a word? Yes, but again, only in the medical and legal professions. We do not have internships in anything else in Israel as a common position. Okay. We are unfortunately out of time. So again, toda rabah, thank you all for joining. This class will be up on YouTube in the next day or so, along with the spreadsheet vocabulary. And again, highly recommend all of you to join us on Wednesday, where you'll actually be being able to practice some of the things we went over today. Until then, toda rabah and litrot. See you all very soon. Take care.